Welcome once again to Lynda Rose. And Lynda and I have been having a pre-broadcast chat about banks. And perhaps we should carry on the conversation. No, we're miserable enough, aren't we, Lynda? But it shows you how things are going now. A human side of, in this case, banking, and in all things is being taken out of our life. And we're expected to go around a computer, and if it doesn't work, or if you're too old and don't really get the thing, what do you do? Do we mind about our young people anymore and our old people anymore, or even the middle age? No, we're all being controlled through our bank accounts. Oh, there you are. I've strayed and got onto it now. But is this signs of the times?
I fear it is. I think we are coming to a time of global totalitarianism, and we're all going to have to obey because more and more, well, you've mentioned banking. They have complete control of our finances because you can't get hold of money very easily anymore. It's all, whatever you own, it is somehow, where is it? Up in the clouds somewhere. The bank's got it. And if we can't access it,
Yeah,
what
exactly.
do we do? So this is it's control that we have coming, Rodney, and it's deeply disturbing.
Yes, and if it could be worse, it is actually in Spain. There's only 4 big banks in Spain. There's no competition here, and you get the Spanish shrug if you complain, because you can't go anywhere else because well, and to that extent in UK it's similar, but you've got a second tier of banking, the new banks. So maybe we should consider that. But it's all part of the scene, isn't it? Lynda, we're down here in the sunny south of Spain, and the sun cheers us up at times. But you've had a year and a half of constant rain. And when we look at the news coming out of Britain, people are disquieted about the rain, but angry about many other things. What's going on?
Well, which answer do you want, Rodney? The social answer that puts it all in the we're onto this, we can control it, or the answer that looks to God and says that we have actually rebelled against him and rejected him, and we are inheriting the results of our own choices. And while we persist in this, things are going to keep on getting pretty awful.
Lynda, be careful. You're a Church of England priest. Church of England priests do not say things like that. They say, oh, well, we'll let that illegal immigrant in because he's become a Christian, and the churches are emptying. But there are very successful C of E churches, and they don't behave the way that the majority of churches behave. And it's not just the C of E. It's the Methodists, it's the United Reform, and in some places it's even the Baptists.
Yes, I think that the established denominations as such are facing a really difficult time. And I think a lot of them are dying on their feet. And sadly, I think they're deservedly dying on their feet because they've abandoned the gospel. But actually, I think the good news is that God's church is flourishing. And I think that Christians are actually waking up to, hey, wait a minute, what is it we actually believe? So, this is a good side of it. And I do think that the church is being reborn as God's church. But like everything else in society at the moment, the church is facing a difficult time. And especially, Church of England is something that I kind of know a little bit about, and it has become extremely woke in recent years. Climate change, you just were talking about, Rodney. And again, there's this idea that somehow we're here as stewards of the earth, and that means that we can change it all. We can control it. So what we have to do now as good Christians is get our net carbon emissions down to 0.
Yeah, is that in Genesis or is it in Revelation? I can't recall that.
Probably the Book of Wisdom.
Could be. we want to talk about initially dear old Lee Anderson, because he sort of is a figurehead in some respects. Because it seems to me very difficult to speak your mind. Now, honestly, it's not quite the same in Southern Europe. You can speak your mind, and it can get you into trouble, but not like England. And it appears to me that people are frightened. In fact, I've seen a survey that said 74% of people are frightened of speaking their mind. That's terrible.
It is terrible. I think sadly it's very much reality these days, because there's such a strong drive to impose ideology over the country as a whole. And if you put a foot out of line, you know that you're going to get you'll be ridiculed, you'll be bullied into silence, you'll be branded as this terrible non-conforming bigot who doesn't deserve to be able to say a word. You will have your job prospects be suddenly they'll be drastically reduced, and you don't know why. You won't be able to get a job. You will face being penalized because you've put a foot out of line. And most people, a lot of people, I hope it's not most, a lot of people are just thinking, well, I just want to have a quiet life. I don't want to run into all this trouble. So I'm just going to keep my head down and keep quiet. And I won't say anything. A lot of people, I honestly think they hate what's going on in the world, and especially in England with what's going on at the moment. And they don't say anything because they are too frightened. And that really is the truth. And I mean, that's why I think something like Voice for Justice is important, because we do keep saying the
Unsayable.
I was trying to think of a diplomatic way of putting it, but yeah, I think you've probably nailed it there, Rodney. We
Well,
keep
listen, it's
saying
sad,
that.
isn't it, when the tiny minorities have got such power. Even politically, going to, we've mentioned England, Scotland, and Wales.
Yeah.
They've got a vast amount of independent power. A lot of people saying too much. And you've got our friend Hamza in charge there. And he's resurrected the lovely Nicola, who we thought we got rid of, got hold of this law. And, well, freedom of speech has gone completely berserk there. And Wales is no better. You've got Mark Drakeford no longer, fortunately, because the vast majority of people in Wales are being driven around the bend, literally at 20 miles an hour. And the frustration it's caused is unbelievable. And it's when political principles get heard and said beyond the common sense. And it's the power thing. But I tell you what, you mentioned in one of your recent epistles about Bournemouth. And congratulations, England, because Bournemouth's done it on steroids. And if you're a male Christian, you're in severe danger, because the police have been told to watch out for these white male Christians, because they're more likely to kick off against the non-common sense that is being put out by certain local authorities. Now, you know Bournemouth very well. What's going on down there?
Well, yes, Rodney, it's been rather extraordinary what's been happening in Bournemouth, because, Bournemouth, Christchurch, and Poole is actually a massive area. And apparently, the powers that be have decided to impose a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit over the whole area. Imagine the cost of that. And they tell us that councils are going bankrupt. I'm not surprised. But the really interesting thing is that they put out a notice, apparently, saying that they realized that their decision wouldn't find universal approval with all groups within the area. And then they went on to list the groups who they're going to get problems with. And at the top of the list, it was white, heterosexual British males who are Christian. So in one fell swoop, they have said that white, heterosexual British males and Christians are not welcome. Now, I mean, this is extraordinary at every level, and I don't know if they had a consultation prior to putting in this the speed limit. I do know that we had a similar one in Oxford, which is where I'm personally based, and the result of that consultation was that 7%, I'll repeat that, 7% of the population said that they wanted to have speed limits and greater speed restrictions over the city. Everybody else said no. This is going to be really bad news. It's going to kill off the life of the city. It will restrict access. It will put people into their little 15-minute areas. So I don't know if Bournemouth carried out a similar consultation, but as I haven't heard anything about it, I suspect they didn't, which would mean that they had just decided unilaterally as a council to impose this 20-mile limit over this vast urban area. And they've done that knowing that some groups who are, hang on, think about it, white, British, heterosexual males and Christians are going to object. Now, the last time I looked, I think that England was mainly still defined as a white male heterosexual, that was our country. And suddenly that group is being told that they are being reactionary and must shut up. And last time I looked too, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Christianity was the established religion of our country. And I think that at least 51% of the population self-identify as Christians. So I'm not very good at maths, Rodney, but I think 51% still makes it the majority. So the majority population in this country has now got to shut up because actually a minority that is imposing their view wants to have a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit over the whole area. And can we ask why they want that 20-mile-per-hour speed limit? Because we know that all over the country there has been outrage because a lot of people have been saying it's dangerous because it slows down the traffic so much that actually people are leaping out in front of cars, and I believe road accidents have increased. It's extraordinary. But it's made it very difficult for businesses to carry on their business because, of course, they are stuck at 20 miles an hour, which slows everything down. And I do know that in the Bournemouth area too, the bus companies have really objected to this 20-mile-an-hour limit, as have taxi drivers, because it is impeding the provision of services. So again, people are being not allowed free movement. On every count, this is extraordinary, and it's being imposed, we assume, against the wishes of the majority. So what's going on in our country?
Well, if somebody had to give a modern theory of a definition of Marxism, you've just done it. Because it's the tiny minority that are controlling the vast majority and keeping them in fear and coming out with legislation that just does that. And if you want a definition of keeping quiet, as Lee Anderson has found out, well, go to China. That's the way they work. And even Russia, that's the way they work. And we've got to decide which we want. But I'll take you back. And I don't know whether you remember this. Does profumo mean anything to you?
It does indeed. The Perfume scandal with Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice Davis.
My goodness me. There you are. That's the legal background coming out now. Well, look, we used to have, and we've always had scandals, big ones, little ones. That was the scandal of the decade. Now I can give you 6 scandals of a year now. Sex scandals. We've had one this very week. We have one every week almost. Something's changed, Lynda.
It has changed, and it worries me that years ago there would have been a condemnation for moral misbehavior. And these days, one gets the impression that actually most people seem to be misbehaving morally. And every once in a while, scandal erupts. But the impression that you have is that everybody's like that. And this is quite bizarre, and especially when you talk about politicians. I know I sound dreadfully old-fashioned, but they ought to be maintaining moral standards. They ought to be morally upright. They ought to be people that we can respect so that we can trust them to take the right actions for the country. And I think these days you can't say that about any politicians, basically, because all these scandals, and you're right, every week there seems to be one, whether it's, you know, sexual abuse, inappropriate touching of aides in Parliament, or whatever. But, the latest one this morning is this guy going on the Tinder gay dating site and then being blackmailed. Well, I'm sorry, but with respect, I don't think politicians should be going on sites like that.
Can
I
I
don't.
put in, Lynda, and say something that I've just heard before we came on air? That even commentaries, even from people like GB News, who are generally a bit better than the average news channel, dare I say, even they are sympathising with this character. And in one sense, yeah, but in another sense, an absolute sense, no.
Yes, well, I was listening to the news over lunchtime, and you're absolutely right. They were calling him courageous for standing up and saying that he'd given the phone numbers of his colleagues to this blackmailer. I don't know. I mean, actually, words fail me, because where have we come to in society when we call somebody who has done something that is morally reprehensible courageous for actually admitting that he's done it, and there's no element of censure for that behavior? I don't know.
Well,
You know,
let's call it the moral compass has swung round a little bit. It's actually gone into reverse. Let's talk about the three cancers of royalty. And this has shocked the nation, even the world, in fact, because they are royalists more than we are in UK sometimes. And you've mentioned in the recent past that paganism is now king of our nation. And in the good old days, the king of a pagan nation took on the nation itself, the well-being of the nation. And if he was upright and straight, the nation prospered. But if he went into paganism, he was guilty and the sin fell on him. And we're comparing things with our present royal setup at the moment. Now, there's been some criticism in the past with Charles and his green and his sons following in his footsteps. But certainly we're perhaps strongly going to put forward a position that paganism produces what it has produced: bitterness, anger, an unhealthy nation. We know the answer as Christians. Now, are we salt enough as Christians to put our head above the parapet, or are we frightened to say anything like 70% of the nation is?
well, I think as Christians we do need to be proud of our faith, if I can take back a word that's been stolen from us. We need to stand up for the truth, and for the nation to prosper, it does most definitely need for Christians to stand up and stand on the gospel, basically. I think I mean, you reference the blog I put out about Charles and Kate and the Duchess of York. And I mean, one really does pray that they are restored to health, Rodney. I do have to say that, because uh, I think it has cast a shadow over the nation, as well as over just the royal family in itself. But of course, what I was trying to draw out in the blog, and what you've just referenced, is that in paganism, the body of the king was very closely tied to his people, and he carried the fate of the people. And if there was something wrong in the nation, if the nation had sinned, then that would reflect on the body of the king, who would be weakened. But if the king was weakened, that would also make the nation weak. So they would lose in battle, they would suffer pestilence, whatever. It all came back to the body of the king. And it's interesting that we have made so much of paganism in recent years. We've rejected Christianity, but we say we're very spiritual, and we've substituted worship of self. And of course, we brought in this incredible blood sacrifice of the unborn. We have exalted sexual license and promiscuity. All these things were features of paganism and were considered to make paganism strong. That's what we have exalted in our nation over the past decades. So we cannot be surprised that we have become morally corrupt and weak, and that we have opened ourselves up to all the problems that we are experiencing.
Well, certainly there's been a celebration of promiscuity for a couple of decades. Some people trace it back to the 60s when it started. There's a fascination with the magic and the occult. That's doing the nation no good. People sort of giggle at witches and broomsticks and whatnot, but there is real danger in all this. Acceptance of certain things that never used to be accepted and now have become normalized, and you daren't speak out against them because you're being a bigot. Let's have a reset in one sense and look at where we are, but also look at the health of the country. It is bad, whether it be literally the NHS health of the country, whether it be the health of climate change. And there is an awful lot of nonsense talked about that. And there's no way we're going to get net zero in 2030, 2035, even 2050. It's costing us a fortune, and the poor are suffering more than any other part of society. And the more I find out about this, and this is not conspiratorial at all, the biggest effect of climate change has always been, for millions of years, the orbit of sun and moon, and the fact that it's not a round orbit, it's elliptical, and you can trace this back millennium. And there's not a right lot we're going to do about that, is there? Unless you know something very clever that I don't. So we pick on dear old carbon, which is extremely healthy in the right quantities, and we blow it up. And we've got carbon now of 300 and odd units per million. Well, that's not high. The scientists have actually said, well, you can have 1200 without it being anything, and even higher in actual fact. Oh, we've got to get it down. Well, if you go down to 200, you die. Just a bit lower, actually, because there's no photosynthesis going to happen. So half-truths are not whole truths, and they can be worse than lies. But it's become a religion. This is what has happened, Lynda. Because it's easy. There's no discipleship. There's no sacrifice. There's no love, certainly.
I think you're absolutely right, Rodney. And what you've obviously put your finger on here is that we are in a spiritual battle in the world. And one of the big problems is that we have gone hook, line, and sinker for that temptation that we are in control, we can manage it. I mean, this is the age-old temptation that was first voiced in the Garden of Eden. And we've gone down that road and said we can control it. And this is what we're seeing with climate change. Again, it's the worship of self, because we can put it right. Whatever it is, we can do it right, we can do it better. And of course, we can't. And it's a little bit, I always think, like, these wonder diets that they come up with all the time. Control your calories. Get down to 2 calories a day and you'll lose weight. I mean, that's a bit silly, but you know what I mean. And it's all putting our bodies actually out of balance when we need to be, eating healthily, we need to be eating the right foods. But again, you just have this wonder diet, which has all the chemicals in, all the rest of it, and you can get your body down to what it ought to be. And of course, it doesn't work. And one has the feeling that with climate change, which is the new religion, and I think there are a lot of disciples actually that have clambered onto this bandwagon. But, if we can only do this, we can put it all right. We can remake creation the way we want it to be. We can do it better, because not only we will control the climate and how much rain we want, how much sun we want, but we can actually, in this process, we can maybe adjust the crops that we eat. So we'll genetically modify our wheat and all the rest of it. We'll make it better and stronger and be able to resist all these vagaries of climate, whatever. And then we'll do something with our rainforests. So we will control how many are there. It's just this total control. And it's actually at heart, it is a rebellion against the way that we are made and against creation as it functions. And of course, if you go back a bit from that, it's a rebellion against God. So that's what we're seeing in the world today, is a battle between, and if you don't like religious terms, okay, forget it. It's a battle between two ideologies. The ideologies of control, and we're in charge, and the ideology of obedience to God because he's wonderful and he's the way, the truth, and the life, and he's the only way that gives us real fulfillment. And it's those two things that are at issue here. And this whole thing about climate change, again, it's just, it is the latest expression of this battle to take back creation from God and to remake it the way that we want it to be, because we can do it so much better.
Well, we've run out of time, but we've not run out of the BBC. We've got to squeeze the BBC in somewhere, because you have said in your past and present that it's not up to much. I would go even further. One of our dogmas as a broadcaster is that we don't reflect society. Lots of broadcasters say, "Oh, we're only reflecting society. Watch EastEnders. That's what really goes on everywhere." We're reflecting society. No, you're not. You're creating it. And nobody creates society more than the BBC. And there was a wonderful illustration on this. And I suppose the big DEI stamp comes on, the diversity, equality, and inclusivity, which is madness. And that's reaped revenge within many, many of our large companies, NHS included. And it's destructive and has proved to be counterproductive in lots of ways. But I know you don't like paying your £169.50 tax for the BBC, but let me give you yet one more reason for not liking it. Late at night is the only time I have to watch television, and so I occasionally put this on, and it was a repeat of and very illustrative of where we are. Michael McIntyre, and there's a program called The Wheel. Don't know whether you've watched it. I've not previously, but it's a British invention. It's not an invention of the States. We can't blame this for that. We get most of our stuff from the States for competitions and games. No, this one is a British invention. And what happens is that fantastic backdrop, fantastic studio lights flashing. There's 7 celebrities, we like celebrities, going round on a merry-go-round, a flat one, like a casino wheel. And in the middle, out of the middle, comes up a competitor who has to answer questions. And you can win, nearly £100,000 at the end of the programme. Which for the BBC, that's a difference, isn't it, from the conveyor belt that used to give rubbish on a Saturday night television. It cost the BBC nothing as a form of prizes, but there you go. But this is real money. And Michael McIntyre is a master of ceremonies, literally in many ways. He's very good. And so he comes on and the wheel goes round. And then looking at this, I thought, this is BBC. Why? Well, I've got to be careful what I say now. You realise why. These were not the normal Joe or the normal Joanna in Great Britain. If you look at the statistics, and it's difficult to tell because a lot of them are hidden. We are led to believe by government departments there's about 15% of us, maybe up to 17, with people that we've let in the country we don't know about, that are not white, British, Caucasian people who have been living here for years. About 15 to 17%. You'd never guess that because the BBC are preaching at us. They want us to be inclusive and diverse and equal. And you look at the people, the celebrities. Well, you could pick out the black guy, fine. You could pick out the brown guy, fine. The homosexual guy and all the other inclusive people around. There were 3 that were white, celebrity, but most of them had something that is not the average Joe. And they were deliberately picked to be inclusive. It did not represent the average personality. But in the middle of the wheel, the contestant came up from below. A lift shot them up on stage. The first person up, there were 3 on the programme, was a lady, and she was wearing the hijab. And you could hardly see anything of her except her face. Well, you could see her face. And she had to answer the questions. The second contestant was a lady, white lady, dare I say, with the most extraordinary bunch of choppers. They were most odd. Perhaps that's inclusivity in some way, but she was the average Joanna. And then I thought there was a delay for the last contestant that came up because it took a long time to get him up. He eventually appeared and he was a dwarf. Oh, you can't say that. Well, I can, because dwarfness is actually a medical term. I can say vertically challenged and be a hypocrite and certain other things. Little people you're supposed to say, actually, according to the script.
Justin Trump said, I'm only 5 foot, Rodney.
Oh, well, you've been done instead. Right. So not only was he a dwarf, he was Scottish. Now, that's great. I'm teasing now. But this is not your normal programming, but it is for the BBC. They do it all the time, whether it's sitcoms. What you have to have on a modern sitcom, a member of LGBT. It's mandatory. You find one that's not got that. There's a challenge. The BBC are preaching at us, and they're preaching stuff that is wrong because it's not your average person, but they want inclusivity. They are doing a lot of damage. People accept it. Television is the biggest brainwasher in the world, and it's been going on since Hitler's time because he knew exactly how to get the people to follow him. And it's the same when you get a minority of elites that are anti-Christian, maybe Marxist, maybe another philosophy, maybe another religion. And I know you've mentioned this or hinted at it in a number of your blogs, is that we are more represented by the Muslim tiny minority in many respects, and they can get away with it because they are a tiny minority and protected. Whereas the Christians can't get away with anything. They're condemned, as you've mentioned, in jobs and such like in our country. So we want a revolution or a resolution. Call it what you like.
The BBC has been pursuing a policy of social engineering for a long time. And I think we are very much seeing the fruits of that. I think my personal view is they are not fit for purpose. And I think they need to be urgently reformed. And when you said that media and television has always been used for those purposes. When you look back to Lord Reith and the foundations of the BBC, they were founded on Christian principle to objectively report the news. And it was simply to report what was going on accurately so everybody knew without any kind of bias. And okay, you can say that total objectivity is never possible, but given that, the news reporting of the BBC was the envy of the world because it was so good, and they did try to present fairly exactly what was happening on all sides. And the entertainment, it was for the benefit and edification of the people. And they held to that. So the programming tended to be very gentle and good-humoured at the beginning. And now, of course, we have these, what you've just referred to, the gritty, showing life as it really is. I can only say, thank the Lord that I don't live on kind of environment of EastEnders. And it's the same on ITV. Thank the Lord I don't live in the kind of environment like Coronation Street, because there are so many murders that seem to happen, and infidelity is just, everybody's at it. And there are so many problems. None of this actually represents ordinary society these days. And we have lost that gentle good humor that years and years ago was a characteristic of television. And now it's pushing the message all the time. And it's very violent. And people say today, well, why have we got so much knife crime on our streets? Why are children behaving the way they are? It's not to be wondered at, because they are being given an image. They are being taught, this is how you behave. And it's really quite vicious and cruel to other people. So this is why, all of these reasons why I don't like the BBC as it now stands. And I don't think I want it to be completely done away with, but I would like to see it completely reformed and again holding to the old values. I want it to stop telling me what I've got to believe. Auntie does not know best. So that has to go, with respect. And they have pursued a policy of positive discrimination in their employment practices in recent years. There was recently a big fuss because I can't remember the exact name of the little group, but it's an LGBT filtering service, and it does have a name, and they have spent a huge amount of money on appointing more people to this little group. And it really, it seems to operate, as far as I can see, like a kind of mafia. So if there are any job applications, if they don't comply with what this group says, they're out. They won't even be considered. And all the programming has to fit with what this group wants, which is why we're getting so many of the same-sex storylines, the transgender transitioning lines, all this sort of stuff. It has to fit with their agreed policy. This is not right. This is overt indoctrination. And it does have enormous influence on society as a whole. So yes, that needs to be something urgent needs to be done to just stop this this process of engineering that's going on. And how it happens at the moment is with great difficulty, I think. But for me, again, the rot set in quite a way back when, for the head of religion, which was always supposed to be a Christian post, and we are a Christian country, and progressively that has been, any Christian input has been reduced, and there's very little Christian presence in the religion department of the BBC now. And of course, this Easter, they completely did away with all the traditional Easter programs. And at the same time, we're having a real sort of promotion for Ramadan and, all these other festivals. But Christianity is being progressively airbrushed out. So I just come back to, this is social engineering, and it's not acceptable.
And finally, we've got the situation of doing something about it. I mentioned salt losing its savor, as it says in the Bible. Salt stings when it gets in a cut, but boy, does it a lot of good, doesn't it? It's how much the church wants to, in love, sting society and point out the error of its ways. Because if the church that has the truth doesn't do that, and it isn't doing that on an average day, even though some churches, dare I say, mainly the black churches of London, they get it. So this is nothing to do with racism. It's to do with fundamentals, the human need, the hole that we've got there that only God can fill. So, church, please get with it before it's too late. But I've got to say, your organisation does that. And it's surprising, Lynda, lastly, how you are being bombarded with difficulties. So are we. Not normal things happen to us. I mean, with you at the moment, it's banking and all the rules and regulations, but it's over and beyond what is the normal, because it's a spiritual battle. The whole thing is a spiritual battle. And if people are going to believe, I suppose, in wizards and witches and broomsticks, they don't want to believe in the real spiritual stuff, do they?
No, because the real spiritual stuff, okay, it leads to freedom, but it requires obedience. And of course, if you can cast a spell, not only do you have the fun of being involved in this, but you can control things spiritually, they think. So yeah, and I do think that the rise in occult and magic of recent years is a major problem, because again, I come back to this the spiritual battle, and if people give allegiance to this kind of thing, whether they know it or not, they are putting themselves under spiritual oppression, under bondage to the thing that they are worshipping, and that thing that they are worshipping is not benign. It is the devil, we call him the destroyer. That's what he is. And that's what people are worshipping when they turn to these great little spells. And I've been quite shocked recently, Rodney, going into bookshops and seeing, kids' books. Cast your spells, learn how to do this. This is horrific. It is putting children who honestly, they don't know. They just think it's a bit of fun. And it's putting them under spiritual bondage to evil. That's what we are up against in this country. So many people have unknowingly but voluntarily place themselves under bondage to evil. And literally all hell will break loose to try and separate them from that. And that comes back to what you were saying about the role and function of the church, which is to be a beacon in society. It's to be the moral compass of society, but it also has a role to guard the flock. And what does a shepherd do? Yes, he guards the flock and he guides them, but he fights off any attack that will try and harm or destroy the sheep. He binds up those who get injured. He heals them. He makes sure they've got enough food to eat. He takes them to the right place for food. This is what the church must be doing. It must seek after those who are lost and who've been caught by what is evil, and it must defend them against that evil. And it must rescue them, it must bring them home. And where they need healing, where they need the wounds sewing up and all the rest of it, the church must do that now. Because our mission is to preach the gospel and to care for Christ's children and to bring them home.
It's a good job, finally. We are cheerful after all, Lynda, because we've read the last 2 pages. Not just the last page, and I regard the last 2 pages in Matthew, and that's what you've been quoting, preach the gospel to all nations. That is good news. And Revelation, the new heaven and earth. And that's positive. We've read the last pages, and it's good news. Get on board, people, right away. Lynda, thank you so much. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you, Rodney.